Some words cut deeper than any blade ever could. When my sister-in-law Jessica looked my 8-year-old daughter Emma straight in the eye and said, "You're not really Grandpa's granddaughter anyway," I felt something fracture inside my chest. But what happened next would change everything about how our families saw the truth. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd have to fight for my children's place in a family. When I married David 3 years ago, I believed love would be enough to bridge any gap. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about his sister Jessica and what she was capable of. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah, and at 34, I thought I'd learned enough about people to spot trouble coming. I'd been through enough in my life to recognize red flags, to trust my instincts when something felt off. Yet somehow, I missed all the warning signs with Jessica until it was almost too late. I suppose I should start at the beginning, with how David and I met. It was at a coffee shop downtown, one of those independent places that still believes in handwritten orders and mismatched furniture. I was there with my daughters, Emma and Sophie, trying to grade papers while they worked on homework at a wobbly table by the window. Emma, who was 5 at the time, had knocked over her hot chocolate, and I was frantically trying to clean it up before it reached my students' essays. That's when David appeared with a stack of napkins and a gentle smile that immediately put me at ease. He helped clean up the mess without making Emma feel embarrassed about the accident, even cracking a joke that had both girls giggling. When he offered to buy them replacement drinks, I found myself saying yes, though I rarely accepted help from strangers. We talked for 2 hours that day, while the girls colored on the backs of his business cards. David worked in construction management, but he spoke about his projects with the passion of an artist describing his masterpieces. He listened when I talked about teaching high school English, asking thoughtful questions about my students and my love for literature. Most importantly, he interacted with Emma and Sophie like they were real people, not just extensions of me that he had to tolerate to get my attention. The girl's father, Michael, had walked out when Sophie was barely 2 years old. He decided that being a father was too much responsibility and moved across the country to start fresh. The divorce had been swift and brutal, leaving me to rebuild our lives from scratch. For 3 years, it had been just the 3 of us against the world, and I'd grown protective of that unit in ways I hadn't fully understood until I started dating again. David was different from the beginning. He understood that loving me meant loving my daughters, not just tolerating them. He showed up to Emma's school plays and Sophie's soccer games without being asked. He helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and gradually became the steady male presence they'd never really had. When he proposed 18 months later, both girls were more excited than I was. Emma, who was 6 by then, had asked him privately if she could call him Dad, a conversation that left him in tears when he told me about it later. Sophie, my sensitive 4-year-old, had started drawing pictures of our family that always included David, usually with him in the center holding all of our hands. The proposal itself was perfect in its simplicity. David had arranged for my best friend Rachel to take the girls for the afternoon, then surprised me with a picnic in the park where we'd had our first official date. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, a vintage-style setting with a modest diamond that caught the light just right. When I said yes, he immediately called the girls to share the news, understanding instinctively that they were part of this decision too. Planning our wedding was a joy I hadn't expected. After the trauma of my divorce, I'd assumed I'd never want to walk down an aisle again. But with David, everything felt different. We kept the ceremony small and intimate, held in the community center where I'd first taken the girls for story time when we'd moved to town. Emma served as my flower girl while Sophie carried our rings in a small basket she'd helped decorate herself. David's family attended, of course, and that was my first real introduction to the dynamics I'd somehow missed during our courtship. His parents, Robert and Linda, were kind and welcoming, particularly Linda, who seemed genuinely delighted to suddenly have granddaughters. She spent the reception teaching Emma how to dance, and listening intently to Sophie's rambling stories about her stuffed animals. Robert, David's father, was quieter but equally warm. He worked as a retired engineer, and had the methodical, thoughtful approach to life that I recognized in David. During the reception, I watched him show Emma how to fold her napkin into different shapes. his patience infinite as she struggled with the more complicated designs. Jessica, David's younger sister, was 28 and worked as a marketing coordinator for a local tech company. She lived in a trendy downtown apartment and had what seemed like an active social life based on her constant phone notifications throughout the ceremony. During our courtship, I'd met her only a handful of times, usually at family gatherings where she seemed pleasant enough, if somewhat distracted. At our wedding, Jessica gave a maid of honor speech that was perfectly adequate, hitting all the expected notes about David finding happiness and welcoming me to the family. She posed for photos with a bright smile and made appropriate small talk during the reception. If there were any warning signs that day, I was too happy to notice them. Our honeymoon was a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains while my parents watched the girls. When we returned, we all moved into David's house, a spacious ranch-style home with a big backyard that the girls immediately claimed as their domain. The transition was surprisingly smooth. David had already converted his home office into a bedroom for Emma and Sophie to share, complete with bunk beds and a reading nook by the window. Those first few months of married life felt like a dream I was afraid to trust fully. David was everything I'd hoped for in a partner and a father figure for my daughters. He coached Emma's little league team and never missed Sophie's dance recitals. He helped with homework every night and had developed elaborate bedtime rituals that left both girls feeling secure and loved. The girls flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Emma, who had always been somewhat reserved around new people, began bringing friends home from school, proud to show off her new dad in their house. Sophie, my little chatterbox, had found someone who listened to her endless stories with genuine interest and enthusiasm. Sunday dinners at Robert and Linda's house became our family tradition. Linda would spend hours preparing elaborate meals, always making sure to include foods she knew the girls enjoyed. Robert would set up board games in the living room afterward, teaching Emma strategy games while helping Sophie with simpler puzzles that matched her attention span. Jessica usually attended these dinners, though she often arrived late or seemed distracted by her phone. I attributed this to her being young and busy with her own life. When she did engage with Emma and Sophie, she seemed friendly enough, asking about school and complimenting their drawings or stories. Looking back, I realize I was seeing what I wanted to see. I was so grateful to have found a loving family for my daughters that I ignored the subtle signs that not everyone was as accepting as they appeared to be. The first crack in my perception came about 6 months after our wedding. Emma had started calling David Dad consistently, and Sophie had followed suit. It felt natural and right, especially since their biological father had shown no interest in maintaining any relationship with them since the divorce. One Sunday after dinner, while David and Robert were outside grilling dessert s'mores and Linda was in the kitchen cleaning up, Jessica cornered me in the hallway. She'd had a couple glasses of wine with dinner, which I thought explained the slight edge in her voice when she spoke. "It's really cute how the girls have attached themselves to David," she said, her tone suggesting she found it anything but cute. "Kids adapt so quickly to new situations, don't they? It's almost like they forget their real family entirely." I felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. "David is their real family now," I replied calmly. "That's what marriage means." "Of course," Jessica agreed quickly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I just think it's important for children to understand the difference between family and step-family. You know, so they don't get confused about their place in things." The conversation was brief and could have been interpreted as innocent concern, but something about her tone left me unsettled. When I mentioned it to David later that night, he brushed off my concerns. "Jess is just protective of family traditions," he said, pulling me closer on the couch. "She'll warm up to the girls once she gets to know them better. She's never been around kids much." I wanted to believe him, and for a while I convinced myself I'd misinterpreted the conversation. Jessica continued to be polite to the girls during family gatherings, though I began to notice she rarely initiated conversations with them and seemed to find excuses to leave the room when they were being particularly animated or affectionate with their grandparents. The second incident happened during Emma's 7th birthday party. We decided to have it at Robert and Linda's house, since their backyard was larger and better suited for the outdoor games we'd planned. Linda had gone all out, decorating with Emma's favorite purple and silver theme, and baking an elaborate unicorn cake that had taken her 2 days to complete. Emma was having the time of her life, surrounded by friends from school and neighbors, plus her new extended family. She'd been calling Robert Grandpa and Linda Grandma for months by then, titles they'd embraced wholeheartedly. Robert had even started teaching her woodworking basics in his garage workshop, a hobby he'd never shared with Jessica, despite her occasional expressed interest. During the party, I overheard Jessica talking to one of her friends who'd stopped by to drop off a gift. They were standing near the back porch, close enough for me to hear while I was arranging presents on the gift table. "It's David's stepdaughter's birthday," Jessica was explaining to her friend. "My parents are treating it like she's actually their granddaughter or something. It's kind of awkward, to be honest. I mean, she's a sweet kid, but she's not really family, you know." Her friend murmured something I couldn't hear, but Jessica's response was clear. "Oh, David's totally smitten with playing dad. Sarah's got him wrapped around her finger, and by extension, so do the kids. Mom and Dad are just going along with it to keep the peace." I felt like I'd been slapped. The casual dismissal of my daughters, the suggestion that David's love for them was somehow manipulated rather than genuine, the implication that his parents' affection was fake, it all hit me at once. But before I could process my emotions fully, Emma came running up to show me a new toy, and the moment passed. That night, after the girls were asleep, and David was in the shower, I found myself staring at the photos from the party on my phone. In picture after picture, Robert and Linda looked genuinely joyful with Emma and Sophie. They weren't just going through the motions, they were fully engaged, completely present, clearly delighted with their role as grandparents. But Jessica was noticeably absent from most of the photos, and when she did appear, her smile looked forced. How had I missed this before? I decided not to say anything to David. What could I say? That I'd overheard his sister making comments about my daughters. That I suspected she didn't really accept them as family. It would sound petty and paranoid, especially since Jessica had never said anything directly harmful to the girls themselves. Besides, Robert and Linda's love for Emma and Sophie was undeniable. They'd embraced their role as grandparents completely, showing up for every school event, remembering favorite foods and toys, creating new traditions that included the girls as central figures rather than afterthoughts. I told myself that Jessica's opinion didn't matter as long as the people who truly counted, David, his parents, and most importantly, Emma and Sophie themselves, felt secure in their relationships. But I started paying closer attention. Over the following months, I noticed patterns I'd previously ignored. Jessica would arrive late to family gatherings and leave early, minimizing her interaction time with the girls. When Emma or Sophie tried to show her something they'd made or tell her about school, she'd give perfunctory responses before changing the subject or finding an excuse to move away. During conversations about family plans or traditions, Jessica would refer to David's family rather than including Emma and Sophie in the description. When Linda talked about her grandchildren's activities, Jessica would visibly tense or find something urgent to check on her phone. Most troubling was how she spoke about the girls when she thought I wasn't listening. I began to catch fragments of conversations where she referred to them as Sarah's kids, or David's stepdaughters, never simply as nieces or family members. David remained oblivious to these undercurrents. He was so happy with our blended family that he saw only the positive interactions. When Jessica smiled at the girls or made polite conversation, he took it at face value without noticing the lack of genuine warmth behind her gestures. Robert and Linda either didn't notice Jessica's attitude or chose to ignore it. They were so completely enamored with being grandparents again that they focused their energy on building relationships with Emma and Sophie rather than managing their adult daughter's feelings about the situation. The tension came to a head during Thanksgiving, about a year and a half after David and I married. Linda had invited David's entire extended family for dinner, including aunts, uncles, and cousins the girls had never met. It was going to be Emma and Sophie's first big holiday as official family members, and they were both excited and nervous about meeting so many new relatives. I spent extra time helping them pick out their outfits and practice polite conversation starters. Emma, now 7, was mature enough to understand that first impressions mattered, while 5-year-old Sophie just wanted to make sure everyone would like her drawings of turkeys. The day started well. Linda had outdone herself with decorations and food preparation, transforming her dining room into a Norman Rockwell painting of family togetherness. Emma and Sophie were on their best behavior, politely greeting each new arrival and answering questions about school and their interests. Robert was in his element, introducing my granddaughters to relatives who hadn't seen him since before our wedding. His pride was evident and infectious, and most of the extended family responded warmly to the girls. David's Uncle Tom spent 20 minutes discussing soccer strategy with Emma, while his Aunt Marie listened patiently to Sophie's detailed explanation of her current favorite stuffed animal. Jessica arrived 2 hours late, claiming work obligations had held her up. She made the rounds greeting family members, but barely acknowledged Emma and Sophie beyond a quick "Hi girls," before moving on to adult conversations. During dinner, the extended family asked typical questions about the girls' school, activities, and plans. Emma and Sophie answered politely, clearly enjoying being included in the adult conversation. Robert and Linda beamed with grandparent pride, sharing stories about recent accomplishments and cute moments. That's when Jessica made her first pointed comment. "It's amazing how quickly kids adapt," she said during a lull in conversation. Emma and Sophie have just slipped right into the family dynamic like they've always been here. On the surface, it could have been a compliment, but her tone suggested something else entirely. Several relatives glanced between Jessica and the girls, sensing an undercurrent they couldn't quite identify. David, either missing the subtext or choosing to ignore it, smiled proudly. "They fit perfectly because they are family. Have been since the day I met them." Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, it's just different, isn't it? When you marry into a family versus being born into it." The comment hung in the air uncomfortably. Emma, who was sitting next to me, looked confused by the sudden shift in tone. Sophie continued eating her mashed potatoes, oblivious to the adult tension swirling around the table. Linda quickly changed the subject to dessert options, and the moment passed, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather outside. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee and pie, the children migrated to the living room to play with toys. Linda kept specifically for visits from grandchildren.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma and Sophie were joined by 2 younger cousins, and they quickly became absorbed in an elaborate game involving dolls and building blocks. I was helping Linda clear dishes when I heard Jessica's voice from the living room, louder than it needed to be. "Girls, make sure you put all of Grandma's toys back exactly where you found them. These aren't your toys like they would be for real grandchildren." The words hit me like a physical blow. Through the doorway, I could see Emma's face crumple with confusion and hurt. Sophie, who didn't fully understand what Jessica meant, looked to her older sister for guidance. Before I could react, Robert's voice cut through the room like thunder. "Jessica Marie Thompson, I need to speak with you." Now, I'd never heard Robert use that tone before. David's father was one of the gentlest men I'd ever met, slow to anger and quick to forgive, but the authority in his voice made everyone in both rooms freeze. Jessica's face went pale as she realized her comment had been overheard. She followed Robert into his study, and though the door closed behind them, their raised voices carried enough for everyone to understand that a serious conversation was taking place. David appeared at my side, having heard at least part of the exchange. "What just happened?" he asked, looking between me and the living room, where Emma and Sophie still sat frozen among the toys. "Your sister just told our daughters they aren't real grandchildren," I said quietly, my voice shaking with anger I was trying to contain. David's expression shifted from confusion to fury faster than I'd ever seen. He started toward the study, but I caught his arm. "Let your father handle it," I said. "The girls need us right now." Emma and Sophie were still sitting exactly where Jessica had left them, afraid to touch anything. The younger cousins had resumed playing, unaware of what had just transpired, but my daughters looked like they'd been caught stealing. I knelt down between them, pulling them both into a hug. "You belong here," I whispered firmly. "This is your family, and these are your toys to play with whenever you visit Grandma and Grandpa." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Are we not real grandchildren?" she asked, in a small voice that broke my heart. "You are absolutely real grandchildren," David said, joining us on the floor. "Aunt Jessica said something very wrong, and Grandpa is explaining that to her right now." The conversation in the study ended abruptly, followed by the sound of a door slamming and a car engine starting in the driveway.
Jessica had left without saying goodbye to anyone. Robert emerged from his study with his face flushed and his usually perfectly combed hair disheveled. He walked straight to the living room and sat down heavily on the couch, near where we were still clustered with the girls. "Emma, Sophie," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Both girls turned to face him, still uncertain but trusting. "You are my granddaughters. Not step-granddaughters, not sort of granddaughters, not temporary granddaughters. You are my real granddaughters, and I love you exactly the same as I would any granddaughter. Anyone who suggests otherwise is wrong, and I will not allow that kind of talk in my house." Sophie, who processed emotions more quickly than her older sister, immediately climbed into Robert's lap and hugged him tightly. "I love you too, Grandpa," she said, with the simple acceptance of a 5-year-old. Emma was more cautious, still processing what had happened. "But we're not really related to you," she said carefully. "Not like blood-related." Robert considered his words carefully before responding. "Emma, family isn't just about blood. Family is about love, commitment, and choosing to be there for each other. Your daddy chose our family when he married your mommy, and we chose all of you right back. That choice makes you just as much my granddaughter as if I'd known you since the day you were born." The simple wisdom of his explanation seemed to satisfy Emma's logical mind. She smiled for the first time since Jessica's comment and moved closer to Robert's chair. "Can we still play with the toys?" Sophie asked from her perch on his lap. "These toys are here specifically for my granddaughters to play with," Robert said firmly. "They always have been, and they always will be." The rest of the family had been listening to this exchange, with various expressions of approval and relief. David's Uncle Tom spoke up from across the room. "For what it's worth, Robert, those girls have been a blessing to this family from day one. Anyone with eyes can see how much joy they've brought you and Linda." Murmurs of agreement came from around the room, and I felt a wave of gratitude for these relative strangers who had just embraced my daughters more warmly than Jessica ever had. Linda appeared from the kitchen, having clearly heard at least part of what had transpired. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Girls, why don't you help Grandma finish setting up the dessert table? I could use some expert taste testers to make sure the pie is ready." Emma and Sophie eagerly followed her to the kitchen, their resilience amazing me once again. Children, I'd learned, could bounce back from hurt much faster than adults when they felt secure in love and support. David and I found ourselves alone with Robert for a moment, while the rest of the family dispersed to various conversations. "I'm sorry," Robert said simply. "Jessica was out of line, and I should have addressed her attitude long before it reached this point." "You couldn't have known," David replied, though I could see he was still processing his own shock at his sister's behavior. "I did know," Robert admitted. "Linda and I both knew Jessica was struggling with the family changes. We hoped she'd come around on her own, but we should have confronted the issue directly instead of hoping it would resolve itself." He looked at me with genuine regret in his eyes. "Sarah, I hope you know that Linda and I have never seen Emma and Sophie as anything other than our granddaughters. From the moment David introduced us to you all, we've considered you complete family." I believed him. The evidence of their love for my daughters was too consistent and genuine to doubt. But I also realized that Jessica's attitude had been more obvious to others than I'd wanted to acknowledge. "What happens now?" I asked. Robert sighed heavily. "Jessica and I had a very frank conversation about respect, family values, and acceptable behavior in this house. She's been struggling with some jealousy issues that go deeper than just the girls, but that's no excuse for hurting children." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's not welcome back until she can apologize sincerely to Emma and Sophie and demonstrate that she understands why her behavior was wrong. I won't have my granddaughters subjected to that kind of treatment in what should be their safe space." The firmness in his voice surprised me. Robert had always struck me as someone who avoided conflict, but apparently protecting his granddaughters was worth making an exception. David reached over and squeezed his father's shoulder. "Thank you, Dad. I know that couldn't have been easy." "It was long overdue," Robert replied. "Your girls deserve better, and frankly so do you and Sarah. The evening continued more peacefully after Jessica's departure. The extended family made extra efforts to include Emma and Sophie in conversations and activities, perhaps overcompensating for what they'd witnessed. Both girls seemed to recover from the incident quickly, especially when Cousin Tom organized an impromptu game of charades that had everyone laughing. As we prepared to leave that night, Linda pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice thick with emotion. I knew Jessica was having trouble adjusting to the changes in our family dynamic, but I didn't realize how deeply her resentment had grown, or that she would ever take it out on the children. She wiped at her eyes with a tissue. "Those girls are the light of our lives, Sarah. Robert and I never had the chance to be hands-on grandparents with David and Jessica when they were young. We were too focused on building careers and financial security. Having Emma and Sophie has given us the opportunity to be the grandparents we always wished we could be." Her sincerity was unmistakable, and I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had embraced my daughters so completely. "I know," I assured her. "The girls know too. What Jessica said was hurtful, but it doesn't change everything you and Robert have done to make them feel loved and wanted." Linda hugged me tightly. "We're going to do better at protecting them from this kind of thing in the future. Family should be a safe space for children to grow and feel secure." On the drive home, Emma and Sophie chattered excitedly about the day's events, already focused on the positive aspects, rather than dwelling on Jessica's hurtful comments. Their resilience amazed me, but I also knew that children often internalize negative messages even when they seem to brush them off on the surface. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I had separate conversations with each girl about what had happened. "Are you okay about what Aunt Jessica said today?" I asked Emma as I smoothed her covers. Emma considered the question seriously, as she always did. "It hurt my feelings when she said we weren't real grandchildren. But then Grandpa explained that we are real grandchildren, and everyone else seemed to think so too." She paused, working through her thoughts. "Why doesn't Aunt Jessica like us, Mom?" It was a question I'd been dreading, but Emma deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes when families change, it takes time for everyone to adjust. Aunt Jessica is having trouble understanding that love grows bigger when we add new people to our family instead of staying the same size. Like when Sophie was born, and I thought you might not love me as much anymore. But then you explained that love isn't like pie where you get smaller pieces when more people want some." The analogy made me smile, despite the serious nature of our conversation. "Exactly like that. But some grown-ups forget that lesson, and need to be reminded." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Will she remember eventually?" "I hope so," I said honestly. "But even if she doesn't, you have Daddy and Grandpa and Grandma and lots of other family members who love you very much." My conversation with Sophie was simpler but equally important. At 5, she didn't fully grasp the complexities of adult jealousy and family dynamics, but she understood that someone had said something mean and that other people had stood up for her. "Grandpa was really serious when he talked to Aunt Jessica," she observed. "Like when you use your serious voice when I'm not listening." Grandpa wanted to make sure she understood that saying mean things about you and Emma was not okay, I explained. Sophie nodded solemnly. "Good. Mean things hurt people's feelings." As I kissed her goodnight, she added, "I'm glad Grandpa loves us for real." "He absolutely does," I assured her. "And so do I, and so does Daddy, and so does Grandma." After both girls were asleep, David and I had our own conversation about the day's events. He was still processing his shock at Jessica's behavior, and his father's firm response. "I honestly had no idea she felt that way," he admitted as we sat together on our couch. "I mean, I knew she wasn't as immediately enthusiastic as Mom and Dad, but I thought she just needed time to warm up to the idea of being an aunt." I decided it was time to share the observations I'd been keeping to myself. "There have been signs," I said gently. "Small things but consistent." I told him about the comments I'd overheard, the body language I'd noticed, the way Jessica consistently referred to Emma and Sophie as Sarah's kids, or David's stepdaughters, rather than as nieces or family members. David listened with growing concern and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" "Because I hoped I was reading too much into it," I admitted. "And because I didn't want to cause problems when the girls were so happy with their new family." He pulled me closer on the couch. "You should have told me. This is exactly the kind of thing I need to know about so we can address it together. I know that now, I said. I just didn't want to be the demanding new wife who complained about your family. David was quiet for a moment, processing this. Sarah, protecting our daughters isn't demanding. It's necessary, and my family includes you and Emma and Sophie now, not just the people I grew up with. The conversation marked a turning point in our marriage. For the first time, I fully understood that David truly saw us as a complete family unit, not as his original family plus add-ons that he needed to manage carefully.
What do we do now? I asked. We follow Dad's lead, David replied firmly. Jessica isn't welcome around the girls until she can treat them with the respect they deserve, and if that means she's not welcome around us at all, then that's her choice to make. The strength in his voice reassured me that he would prioritize our daughter's emotional safety over maintaining family peace at any cost. In the days following Thanksgiving, Robert called to check on Emma and Sophie multiple times. He also invited them for a special grandfather-granddaughter day, where they could work on projects in his workshop without any potential family drama. Linda sent care packages with the girls' favorite cookies and small gifts, along with notes addressed specifically to my wonderful granddaughters. The extra attention and affirmation seemed to help both girls process what had happened and move forward without lasting insecurity. Jessica, meanwhile, had gone silent. She didn't call David or respond to his attempts to reach out to her. According to Robert, she'd taken a few days off work and was staying with a friend while she figured things out. I found myself feeling an unexpected mixture of emotions about Jessica's situation. I was angry about how she'd treated my daughters, but I also felt some sympathy for the fact that she was clearly struggling with changes in her family dynamic. Being David's only sibling for 28 years, then suddenly having to share parental attention with a new daughter-in-law and two stepdaughters, couldn't have been easy. But sympathy didn't excuse hurting children, and I was grateful that Robert had made it clear that Jessica's feelings, however understandable, didn't give her the right to make Emma and Sophie feel unwanted in their own family. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Jessica finally called David. Their conversation was brief, and according to David, not particularly productive. She apologized for losing her temper, but stopped short of acknowledging that her underlying attitude toward the girls was problematic. She thinks this is about one bad moment instead of a pattern of behavior, David explained after hanging up. She wants to come to Sunday dinner this week like nothing happened. What did you tell her? That she needs to have a real conversation with Dad first, and that any future relationship with our family depends on how she chooses to treat Emma and Sophie going forward. I was proud of David's response, but I also knew this situation was far from resolved. Jessica's half-hearted apology suggested she still didn't understand the real issue, which meant the potential for future problems remained high. As December approached and holiday plans began taking shape, I found myself dreading the potential for more family conflict. Christmas was Emma and Sophie's favorite time of year, and I was determined not to let adult drama overshadow their joy in the season. But I also knew that Jessica's attitude represented a deeper challenge that wouldn't simply disappear with time and good intentions. She had revealed her true feelings about my daughter's place in the family, and now we all had to figure out how to move forward with that knowledge. The real test would come when we were all in the same room again, and I could only hope that Robert's firm stance and David's support would be enough to protect Emma and Sophie from any further emotional harm. Little did I know that Jessica's next move would force the entire family to confront the truth about acceptance, belonging, and what it really means to choose love over blood when building a family. December arrived with its usual chaos of school concerts, gift shopping, and endless holiday planning. I thought maybe the drama with Jessica had finally blown over when she agreed to meet with Robert privately before Christmas Eve dinner. David seemed cautiously optimistic that his sister was ready to make amends, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into another minefield. Emma and Sophie were practically vibrating with excitement about Christmas. They'd been counting down the days since Thanksgiving, and Linda had promised them they could help decorate her tree and bake cookies for Santa. The normalcy of their enthusiasm made me hope that maybe we could get through the holidays without any more family explosions. I was wrapping presents in our bedroom when David came in looking troubled. He'd just gotten off the phone with his father, and from his expression, the conversation hadn't gone well. Jessica met with Dad yesterday, he said, sitting heavily on the edge of our bed.
She apologized for what she said to the girls, but when he asked her if she understood why it was wrong, she basically said she was just being honest about the family dynamics. My heart sank. She still doesn't get it. It gets worse. She told Dad that she thinks Mom and Dad are overcompensating with Emma and Sophie because they feel guilty about not being more involved grandparents when we were kids. She said the girls are getting special treatment that other grandchildren wouldn't receive. I set down the wrapping paper, trying to process this latest revelation. What other grandchildren? You and Jessica don't have siblings, and she's not even married. That's exactly what Dad asked her. She apparently got flustered and said she meant hypothetical future grandchildren, but then she made some comment about how Emma and Sophie get more attention and resources than they would if they were just one of many grandchildren. The selfishness of Jessica's perspective was breathtaking. She was essentially arguing that my daughters were receiving too much love and attention from their grandparents, as if affection were a limited resource that needed to be rationed. So what happens now? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Dad told her that her attitude is still completely unacceptable and that she's not invited to Christmas Eve dinner. She can come to Christmas Day brunch if she promises to behave appropriately, but one wrong word and she's out permanently. Part of me felt relieved that Robert was maintaining his firm stance, but another part worried about the long-term implications for David's relationship with his sister. Family rifts had a way of festering and growing more complicated over time. How do you feel about that? I asked carefully. David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Honestly, I'm starting to realize that I don't really know my sister as well as I thought I did. The Jessica who would hurt kids because she's jealous of the attention they receive isn't someone I recognize. He looked up at me with pain in his eyes. Is this who she's always been, and I just never noticed, or has something changed that made her this bitter? I wished I had answers for him, but the truth was that I'd only known Jessica for a few years, and most of that time I'd been trying to see the best in her for David's sake. Christmas Eve dinner was peaceful but subdued without Jessica's presence. Emma and Sophie helped Linda set the table with her special holiday china, and Robert read them the story of the first Christmas while David and I cleaned up after dinner. The girls were so excited about Santa's impending arrival that they barely noticed the absence of their aunt. Later that evening, after we'd returned home and gotten the girls settled in bed, David's phone started buzzing with text messages. Jessica had apparently spent Christmas Eve at a bar, and was now sending increasingly incoherent and angry messages about being excluded from her own family and how those kids had ruined everything. "She's drunk," David said, scrolling through the messages with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "Listen to this. Hope your fake family has a Merry Christmas. Don't expect me to pretend to care about random children anymore." The venom in her words made my stomach turn. Random children, that's what she thinks of Emma and Sophie. David set his phone aside without responding to any of the messages. "I can't deal with this tonight. Tomorrow is Christmas, and I'm not letting her poison it for our family." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with Emma and Sophie practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. They tore through their presents with the uninhibited joy that only children can manage, squealing with delight over everything from small stocking stuffers to their big gifts. David had outdone himself finding presents that spoke to each girl's individual interests. Emma received a deluxe art set and a series of mystery books she'd been wanting, while Sophie got a dollhouse, complete with furniture and a family of tiny dolls. Watching him interact with them as they explored their gifts, I was reminded once again of how naturally he'd stepped into the father role. We were supposed to head to Robert and Linda's house for Christmas brunch at 11, but at 10:30 Linda called in tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "Jessica showed up here an hour ago, still drunk from last night, demanding to be let in. When Robert tried to talk to her, she started screaming about how we've replaced her with Sarah's brats." My blood ran cold. "Where is she now?" "Robert made her leave, but Sarah, she said some truly awful things. I don't want to repeat them with the girls around, but I'm worried about what might happen if she comes back." David took the phone from me. "Mom, what exactly did she say?" I could hear Linda's muffled response but not the specific words. David's face went through several expressions as he listened, finally settling on a mixture of anger and disgust. "We'll be right over," he said. "Finally, and Mom, if she comes back, call the police. She's crossed the line from family drama into harassment." After he hung up, I asked quietly, How bad was it? Bad enough that I'm not repeating it in front of the girls, he said grimly. Let's just say that Jessica has some very specific and very ugly opinions about you, me, our marriage, and our daughters. The drive to his parents' house was tense. Emma and Sophie chatted excitedly about showing their grandparents their Christmas presents, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around them. I envied their innocence while simultaneously feeling fiercely protective of it. Linda met us at the door with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile for the girls. "Merry Christmas, my darlings," she said, hugging Emma and Sophie tightly. "Grandpa is in the kitchen making his famous Christmas pancakes." Robert looked older than his 62 years when we found him at the stove. The stress of dealing with Jessica was clearly taking its toll, but he brightened immediately when he saw the girls. "There are my favorite Christmas helpers," he said, lifting Sophie onto a step stool so she could help flip pancakes. "I was hoping you'd get here in time to help me with the tricky ones." While the girls were distracted with cooking, Linda pulled David and me aside to explain what had really happened during Jessica's visit. She was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday and reeked of alcohol. Linda began, her voice barely above a whisper. When Robert answered the door, she pushed past him and started ranting about how we'd chosen Sarah's children over our own daughter. She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. She said that Emma and Sophie were manipulative little actresses who had fooled us into thinking they were sweet, but that you, Sarah, had trained them to play up to older people to get what they wanted. The accusation was so absurd and hurtful that I felt momentarily speechless. The idea that my 7- and 5-year-old daughters were somehow conniving manipulators was beyond insulting. "It gets worse," Linda continued. "She said that David only married you for convenience, that you trapped him by getting pregnant, and that he'd eventually realize his mistake and leave." David's jaw clenched. "She said that. About us?" Linda nodded miserably. "When Robert told her to stop talking and leave, she said that Emma and Sophie would never be real family no matter how much we pretended, and that she'd make sure they knew it every chance she got." The threat was unmistakable. Jessica wasn't just expressing her feelings anymore, she was promising to actively work to hurt my daughters. That's when Robert told her she wasn't welcome here anymore and physically escorted her to her car, Linda finished. "But Sarah, I'm worried she might try to approach the girls directly." She was so angry and irrational. The thought of Jessica confronting Emma or Sophie when I wasn't there to protect them made my stomach turn. They were too young to understand that their aunt's hostility wasn't their fault, and I couldn't bear the thought of them being subjected to more of her cruelty. "We need to talk to their school," I said immediately. "Make sure Jessica isn't allowed to pick them up or have any contact with them during school hours." David nodded grimly. "And we should probably consider a restraining order if this behavior continues." The rest of Christmas Day passed more peacefully, but I found myself constantly on edge, listening for cars in the driveway and watching the windows for signs of Jessica's return. Emma and Sophie remained blissfully unaware of the morning's drama, enjoying their time with their grandparents and showing off their Christmas presents. Robert made extra efforts to engage with both girls, teaching Emma a new card game and helping Sophie build an elaborate castle with her new blocks. Linda fussed over them more than usual, making their favorite snacks and taking dozens of photos of every activity. I realized they were both overcompensating, trying to shower the girls with enough love and attention to counteract any damage Jessica might have done to their sense of belonging in the family. While I appreciated their efforts, I also worried that the adults' anxiety was starting to become noticeable to the children. Late in the afternoon, as we were getting ready to head home, Emma approached me with a worried expression. "Mom, is Grandma sad about something? She keeps hugging us extra tight today." Children, I'd learned, were far more perceptive than adults often gave them credit for. Emma had picked up on the undercurrents of stress despite everyone's efforts to maintain a cheerful facade. "Grandma and Grandpa are just really happy to have us here for Christmas," I said carefully. "Sometimes when people are very happy, they show it by giving extra hugs." Emma seemed to accept this explanation, but I made a mental note to be more conscious of how our adult emotions were affecting the girls. They deserved to feel secure and carefree, not anxious about family tensions they couldn't understand or control. That evening, after Emma and Sophie were in bed playing with their new toys, David and I had a serious conversation about how to handle the Jessica situation going forward. "I think we need to be proactive about this," I said. "Not just reactive when she does something awful." David agreed. "What do you have in mind?" "First, we document everything. Every inappropriate comment, every threat, every time she shows up somewhere she shouldn't be. If this escalates to legal action, we'll need evidence. I'd learned the importance of documentation during my divorce from Michael. Courts and law enforcement took family disputes more seriously when there was a clear paper trail of problematic behavior. Second, we make sure all the important people in the girls' lives know what's happening. Their teachers, their after-school program coordinators, their friends' parents. Jessica can't hurt them if everyone who cares about them is watching out for warning signs.
David looked uncomfortable with the idea of airing family problems to relative strangers, but he understood the necessity. And third, we prepare the girls, age appropriately, but honestly. They need to understand that Aunt Jessica is having some problems right now that have nothing to do with them, and that if she ever says or does anything that makes them uncomfortable, they should tell us immediately. It felt wrong to have to warn my young daughters about a family member, but Jessica had forfeited the right to benefit of the doubt when she'd threatened to actively hurt them. Over the next few days, I quietly began implementing our safety plan. I spoke with Emma's teacher and Sophie's kindergarten teacher, explaining that there was some family conflict and that Jessica Thompson was not authorized to have any contact with my daughters at school. Both teachers were understanding and professional, assuring me that they would alert the office and make notes in the girls' files. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, even mentioned that she'd dealt with similar situations before and knew how to handle them discreetly. I also reached out to Rachel, my best friend and emergency contact for the girls, to explain the situation. Rachel had never particularly liked Jessica, having witnessed some of her subtle dismissiveness toward Emma and Sophie at family gatherings. I always thought there was something off about her, Rachel said when I finished explaining recent events. She had this way of looking at the girls, like they were imposters or something. It was subtle, but it was there. Her observation confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that Jessica's hostility hadn't developed overnight, but had been building for years beneath a veneer of polite tolerance. The conversation with Emma and Sophie was more difficult. I waited until a quiet moment when we were all cuddled on the couch after dinner, then brought up the topic as gently as I could. You know how sometimes people have problems that make them say or do things that aren't very nice? I began. Both girls nodded. They'd encountered playground bullies and difficult classmates, so the concept wasn't entirely foreign to them. Well, Aunt Jessica is having some problems right now that are making her say mean things about our family. None of those mean things are true, and they're not your fault, but I want you to know that if she ever says anything that hurts your feelings or makes you scared, you should tell me or Daddy right away. Emma, with her 7-year-old's need to understand everything logically, asked, "What kind of problems is she having?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes when families change, like when Daddy and I got married and you girls became part of his family, it takes some people longer to adjust. Aunt Jessica is having trouble understanding that love grows bigger when families grow bigger. Sophie, ever practical, asked, "Will she get better?" "I hope so," I said honestly. "But until she does, we need to make sure you girls feel safe and loved." Both girls seemed to accept this explanation without becoming overly worried. Children, I'd noticed, were remarkably adaptable when given honest information appropriate to their developmental level. New Year's Eve came and went without incident. David and I had decided to stay home with the girls, rather than attend any family gatherings, partly to avoid potential drama, but mostly because we wanted to establish our own traditions as a nuclear family unit. We made it until almost 10 o'clock before Emma and Sophie fell asleep on the couch during our movie marathon, and David and I quietly celebrated the new year with hot chocolate and hopes for a more peaceful 12 months ahead. Those hopes were short-lived. On January 3rd, I received a phone call from Emma's school. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was carefully controlled when she explained that a woman claiming to be Emma's aunt had tried to check her out of school early, saying there was a family emergency. We followed protocol and asked for identification, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. When we saw that Jessica Thompson wasn't on Emma's approved pickup list, we refused to release her. The woman became very agitated and started making some concerning statements about the school not understanding the real family situation. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone. What kind of statements? She said that Emma wasn't really related to most of the people on her emergency contact list, and that as the biological aunt, she had more right to make decisions about Emma's welfare than some of the people we would call. The twisted logic of Jessica's argument was both infuriating and terrifying.
She was essentially claiming that her biological relationship to David gave her more authority over my daughters than I had as their mother or Robert and Linda had as their legal grandparents. Where is she now? Security escorted her off campus, and we filed an incident report. We also wanted to let you know that we're implementing additional security measures for both Emma and Sophie. No one will be allowed to see them or receive information about them without being on your approved list and showing proper identification. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez profusely and immediately called David at work. He left his office within minutes and met me at the school to pick up both girls early. Emma was confused by the sudden change in routine, but didn't seem upset. When we explained that Aunt Jessica had visited her school and the teachers had handled the situation appropriately, she simply asked if this was part of the problems we'd discussed. Yes, I said. This is exactly the kind of thing we wanted you to know about. You did nothing wrong, and the teachers did exactly what they were supposed to do to keep you safe. Sophie, who attended afternoon kindergarten at the same school, had been completely unaware of the morning's drama. We decided not to worry her with details, but did remind her of our previous conversation about telling trusted adults if anyone made her uncomfortable. That evening, David called his father to report the school incident. Robert was appalled by Jessica's behavior and immediately offered to speak with her, but David convinced him that direct family intervention might only escalate the situation further. Instead, we decided to contact a family attorney the next morning to discuss our options for legal protection. The attorney Margaret Chen specialized in family law and had extensive experience with custody disputes and domestic conflicts. After listening to our account of Jessica's behavior over the past several months, she recommended filing for a restraining order. The school incident shows a clear escalation in her behavior, Margaret explained. She's moved from making hurtful comments to actively trying to interfere with your children's daily lives. A restraining order would legally prohibit her from coming within a certain distance of you, your home, the children's school, and any other locations you frequent regularly. The idea of taking legal action against David's sister felt extreme, but Margaret assured us that restraining orders were common tools for protecting families from harassment, even when the harassment came from relatives. Family relationships don't give people the right to cause emotional harm or disrupt your children's sense of security, she said firmly. Your first responsibility is to protect Emma and Sophie, regardless of Jessica's connection to your husband. We scheduled a court date for the following week and began gathering documentation of Jessica's behavior. I was grateful for my habit of taking screenshots and saving voicemails, as they provided clear evidence of the pattern of escalation in her conduct. David struggled more with the decision to pursue legal action. Despite everything Jessica had done, she was still his sister, and part of him hoped that family intervention might still resolve the situation without involving the courts. What if this makes everything worse? He asked as we sat in Margaret's office, preparing to file the paperwork. What if it pushes her over the edge completely? Margaret had clearly heard this concern before. Mr. Thompson, your sister has already gone over the edge. She tried to remove your daughter from school without permission. That's not normal family conflict, that's potentially criminal behavior. She leaned forward, her expression serious. The question isn't whether legal action might make Jessica angrier. The question is whether you're willing to wait and see how much further she's willing to go without any consequences for her actions. When she put it that way, the choice became clear. We filed for the restraining order that afternoon. Jessica was served with the papers 2 days later. According to Robert, who received a frantic phone call from her immediately afterward, she was shocked and outraged that we would involve strangers in family business. She keeps saying that this is all a misunderstanding, Robert told us that evening. That she was just trying to help at the school and we've blown everything out of proportion. The fact that Jessica still didn't understand the inappropriateness of her behavior was almost more concerning than the behavior itself. She seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that attempting to remove someone else's child from school without permission was wrong, regardless of her motivation. Did you explain to her why we felt this was necessary? David asked his father. Robert sighed heavily. I tried, son, but she's so focused on her own sense of being wronged that she can't see how her actions have affected anyone else. She keeps talking about how Emma and Sophie have turned the whole family against her. The victim mentality was classic Jessica, but it was also dangerous. People who saw themselves as the wronged party in every situation often felt justified in escalating their behavior to get what they believed they deserved. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Over the weekend, I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound and checking the locks on our doors multiple times each day. Emma noticed my increased anxiety and asked if I was worried about something. I tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but I could see that my stress was beginning to affect both girls. Mom seemed scared. I overheard Sophie telling her sister as they played in their room, but she won't tell us why. That conversation was a wake-up call. In my efforts to protect Emma and Sophie from adult drama, I was inadvertently creating a different kind of anxiety by letting them see my fear without understanding its source. That evening, I sat both girls down for another age-appropriate conversation about the current situation. Remember how we talked about Aunt Jessica having problems that make her say and do mean things? I began. Both girls nodded. Well, those problems have gotten a little worse, and she tried to pick up Emma from school without permission. That's not allowed, and it made Mommy and Daddy worried about keeping you both safe. Emma's eyes widened. She tried to take me from school. She tried, but your teachers did exactly what they were supposed to do and didn't let her. No one can take you from school, except Mommy, Daddy, or the other people on your special list. I could see Emma processing this information with the seriousness of a child who was beginning to understand that the adult world contained real dangers. Are we in trouble? Sophie asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. No, sweetie, you're not in trouble at all. Aunt Jessica is in trouble because she broke rules about keeping children safe. Mommy and Daddy are talking to some people who help families solve problems like this. The conversation seemed to help both girls feel more secure. Having concrete information, even if it was simplified, was apparently less frightening than sensing adult anxiety without understanding its cause. Sunday evening, the night before our court date, David's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. When he answered, Jessica's voice was slurred and agitated on the other end. "This is ridiculous, David," she said without preamble. "You're going to court tomorrow to get a restraining order against your own sister? Over what? Trying to help with those kids." David put the phone on speaker so I could hear the conversation, gesturing for me to start recording on my phone. "Jessica, you tried to remove Emma from school without permission," David said calmly. "That's not helping, that's kidnapping. Don't be dramatic. I'm their aunt. I have rights." "No, Jessica, you don't. You have no legal rights regarding Emma and Sophie whatsoever." There was a long pause before Jessica's voice came back, colder and more focused than before. "We'll see about that," she said. "Those girls don't belong in this family anyway. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about your precious little family." The line went dead, leaving David and me staring at each other in shock. The threat was vague, but unmistakably menacing. "We need to get that recording to Margaret first thing in the morning," I said. David nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Despite everything Jessica had done, hearing his sister threaten our family so directly was clearly devastating for him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry my sister has put us through this. I'm sorry you have to worry about protecting Emma and Sophie from someone who should love them." I took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "This isn't your fault, David. You couldn't have predicted or prevented Jessica's behavior." But even as I said the words, I wondered what other surprises Jessica might have in store for us. Her final threat suggested that she wasn't done fighting, and I had a sinking feeling that the restraining order would be just the beginning of our legal battles. The next morning, we would face Jessica in court for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I could only hope that the judge would see through her manipulations and grant us the protection our family desperately needed. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected on Monday morning. Families with various legal issues filled the waiting area, and I found myself wondering how many of them were dealing with their own versions of family dysfunction. David sat beside me, nervously adjusting his tie, while Margaret reviewed our documentation one final time. Jessica arrived with a lawyer I didn't recognize. A sharp-dressed woman, who looked like she specialized in making problems disappear. Jessica herself looked polished and composed, nothing like the disheveled, drunk woman who had terrorized her parents on Christmas morning.
She'd clearly prepared for this moment. When our case was called, we all filed into the courtroom. Judge Harrison was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the paperwork quickly before addressing both sides. "This is a petition for a restraining order involving family members," she began.
I want to hear from both parties, but I expect civility and facts, not emotions or family grievances. Margaret presented our case methodically, walking through Jessica's escalating behavior from the Thanksgiving incident through the school attempted pickup. She played the recording from Jessica's threatening phone call, and I watched the judge's expression grow more serious as she listened. Jessica's lawyer argued that the incidents were misunderstandings blown out of proportion by an oversensitive stepmother who wanted to cut her client off from her brother's family. She painted Jessica as a concerned aunt whose attempts to maintain family relationships had been criminalized by vindictive in-laws. Your Honor, Jessica's lawyer continued, my client has been systematically excluded from family gatherings and denied access to her nephew's children based on minor disagreements about family dynamics. She was merely trying to help when she visited the school. It was a clever strategy, reframing Jessica's harassment as victimization and my protective instincts as overreaction. For a moment I worried the judge might buy into this narrative. Then Margaret asked to present additional evidence. Your Honor, we have documentation showing a pattern of escalating behavior that goes far beyond family disagreements. She handed over printed screenshots of social media posts Jessica had made over the past month. I hadn't known about these posts until Margaret's investigator found them over the weekend. Jessica had been using her personal social media accounts to share increasingly unhinged rants about fake families and children who manipulate elderly grandparents for financial gain. One post in particular made my stomach turn. Some people use innocent children as weapons to destroy real family bonds. These kids will grow up thinking they're entitled to everything while the actual family gets pushed aside. Mark my words, this won't last forever. Another post showed a photo of Emma and Sophie from Linda's Facebook page, which Jessica had screenshot and shared with the caption, teaching kids to call random people grandma and grandpa is confusing and harmful. Real family means something. The judge studied these posts carefully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When Jessica's lawyer tried to dismiss them as venting on social media, Judge Harrison cut her off. These posts specifically target minor children and contain implied threats about future action. Combined with the attempted school pickup and recorded phone call, they establish a clear pattern of harassment. She turned to Jessica directly. Miss Thompson, do you understand that your behavior toward these children has been inappropriate? Jessica stood up, ignoring her lawyer's attempt to keep her seated. Your Honor, with respect, those children have completely taken over my family. My parents spend more money on them than they ever spent on me and my brother. They get more attention, more gifts, more everything, and for what? Because some woman convinced my brother to play daddy to kids that aren't even his. The courtroom fell silent. Jessica had just confirmed everything we'd documented, but in her mind she was finally getting to tell her side of the story. My brother was happy before this marriage, she continued, her voice rising. He had money, freedom, a real relationship with our parents. Now everything revolves around soccer games and school plays for kids who will probably dump him the minute their real father decides he wants them back. David stood up abruptly. Your Honor, may I respond to that? Judge Harrison nodded, and David's voice was steady but emotional when he spoke. Those children are my daughters in every way that matters. I chose them, I love them, and I will protect them from anyone who tries to hurt them, including my biological sister. Jessica's assumption that my love for Emma and Sophie is somehow fake or temporary shows exactly why we need this restraining order. He paused, looking directly at Jessica. I'm not the same person I was before I married Sarah and became a father. I'm better, I'm complete. And if Jessica can't accept that, then she's chosen to remove herself from our lives. Jessica's lawyer was frantically trying to get her client to sit down and stop talking, but Jessica was past listening to legal advice. They've brainwashed you, she said to David, her voice breaking. That woman and her kids have turned you against your real family. Mom and Dad too. Everyone thinks these kids are so perfect, but I see through their act. Judge Harrison had heard enough. Miss Thompson, sit down immediately or you'll be held in contempt. Jessica finally sat, but the damage was done. She'd revealed her true feelings in open court, confirming everything we'd alleged and more. The judge took a brief recess to review all the evidence. When she returned, her decision was swift and decisive. I'm granting the restraining order for a period of 1 year, she announced. Thompson is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of the petitioners, their home, the children's school, or any family gatherings where the children will be present. She looked directly at Jessica. Miss Thompson, if you violate this order in any way, you will face criminal charges. I strongly suggest you seek counseling to address the issues that led to this situation. Jessica burst into tears, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use before, but genuine sobs of someone whose world had just collapsed. Her lawyer quickly escorted her from the courtroom while she continued crying about how unfair everything was. David and I sat in stunned silence for a moment. We'd won, but the victory felt hollow. This legal proceeding had just formalized the end of David's relationship with his only sibling. Outside the courthouse, Margaret explained the practical implications of the restraining order. Jessica couldn't contact us directly, couldn't come to our house or the girls' school, and couldn't attend family gatherings where Emma and Sophie would be present. What about holidays and family events? David asked. Your parents will have to choose. Margaret replied, they can invite Jessica, or they can invite your family, but not both. The restraining order makes it illegal for her to be in the same location as your children. The drive home was quiet. David stared out the window while I focused on the road, both of us processing what had just happened and what it meant for our future. That evening, Robert called to check on us. He'd already heard from Jessica's lawyer about the restraining order and wanted to make sure we were okay. I'm proud of you both for protecting those girls, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I know this wasn't easy, especially for you, David. It was necessary, David replied, though I could hear the pain in his voice. Jessica made her choices, and now we all have to live with the consequences. Robert was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Linda and I have been talking, and we want you to know that our loyalty is with you and the girls. If choosing between Jessica and our granddaughters means we don't see Jessica at family events, then that's what it means. The support from David's parents was exactly what we needed to hear, but I also felt sad for them. They were losing one child to protect their grandchildren, and that couldn't be easy at their age. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to a new normal. Emma and Sophie seemed to sense that the adult tension had resolved, and they stopped asking worried questions about whether everyone was okay. The extra security measures at school became routine, and both girls adapted to showing their special IDs and waiting for approved pickup persons. Jessica honored the restraining order, at least physically. We heard through Robert that she'd moved to a different city and taken a new job, essentially removing herself from our daily orbit entirely. Her social media accounts went silent, and the threatening phone calls stopped, but the emotional aftermath lingered longer than the legal proceedings. David struggled with guilt about the estrangement from his sister, even though he knew protecting Emma and Sophie had been the right choice. Some nights I'd find him staring at old family photos, mourning the relationship that could have been. Do you think I failed her somehow? He asked one evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the girls play in the yard. Was there something I could have done differently to prevent all this? I considered his question carefully before answering. Jessica is a grown woman who made her own choices. You can't love someone into being a better person if they don't want to change. But she's my sister, he said quietly. I always thought family meant we'd figure things out eventually. Family does mean figuring things out, I agreed, but Emma and Sophie are your family too, and they deserved protection from someone who was actively trying to hurt them. 3 months after the court hearing, Linda called with unexpected news. Jessica had reached out to her, asking if they could meet for coffee. She claimed she wanted to apologize and try to rebuild some kind of relationship with the family. What do you think? Linda asked. Should I see her? David and I discussed it that night, weighing the potential benefits against the risks of Jessica manipulating her way back into position to hurt the girls again. I think you should meet with her, I said finally, surprising David, but with conditions. Meet in a public place, keep it short, and don't discuss Emma and Sophie at all. If she's genuinely changed, she'll respect those boundaries. Linda met Jessica at a coffee shop downtown the following Saturday. The conversation lasted less than an hour, and Linda's report was mixed. She apologized for her behavior and said she's been in therapy. Linda told us, but when I explained that rebuilding trust would take time and that the girls' safety had to come first, she got defensive again. According to Linda, Jessica had expected the apology to immediately restore her place in family gatherings. When Linda explained that the restraining order would remain in place and that Jessica would need to respect our boundaries, she'd become frustrated and left abruptly. She's not ready, Linda concluded sadly. Maybe someday, but not yet. That someday might never come, and we all had to make peace with that possibility. Emma and Sophie were growing up in a family that loved and supported them unconditionally. They had grandparents who adored them, a father who'd chosen them completely, and extended family members who welcomed them warmly. 6 months later, Emma asked me why Aunt Jessica never came to family dinners anymore. I'd been dreading this question but had prepared an age-appropriate answer. Sometimes adults have disagreements that are too big to fix right away, I explained. Aunt Jessica decided she needed some space from the family to work on her problems. Will she come back? Emma asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But our family is complete and happy just the way it is right now. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her homework without further questions. Sophie, now 6, had barely known Jessica well enough to miss her presence at family events. A year after the restraining order was granted, we received notice that it was set to expire. Margaret contacted us to ask if we wanted to renew it, given that Jessica had honored its terms and hadn't attempted any contact. David and I decided to let it expire but remain vigilant. Jessica had stayed away for a full year, suggesting that either the legal consequences had been effective or she'd genuinely moved on with her life. That decision felt like closing a chapter on a painful period in our family's history. We'd learned that love doesn't automatically conquer all obstacles, that sometimes protecting the people you care about requires making difficult choices, and that family is defined by commitment and care, rather than blood alone. Robert and Linda continued to be devoted grandparents, never showing any signs that they regretted choosing Emma and Sophie over maintaining peace with Jessica. Their love for the girls only deepened over time, creating traditions and memories that would last lifetimes. David found his footing as a father and husband who could set firm boundaries when necessary. The experience with Jessica had taught him that loyalty to family meant protecting the most vulnerable members, even when it required standing up to people he'd once trusted. Emma and Sophie grew into confident, secure children who knew they belonged in our family completely. They called Robert and Linda their grandparents without qualification, introduced David as their dad to anyone who would listen, and never seemed to doubt their place in our loving chosen family. As for Jessica, we heard occasional updates through Robert's carefully filtered reports. She'd stayed in her new city, built a different life, and seemed to have accepted that her choices had consequences. Whether she'd truly changed or simply moved on to other targets for her resentment, we might never know. But it no longer mattered. Our family had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, more unified, and absolutely certain of our love for each other. Sometimes the most profound act of love is protecting what matters most, even when it costs you relationships you once valued. In the end, Emma and Sophie were never not real grandchildren. They were simply granddaughters, whose place in the family had to be defended against someone who couldn't see past her own pain, to recognize the beautiful truth that love multiplies when shared rather than diminishing when divided. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.